The most expensive phone I owned last year never actually broke. Sat in the rack for 6 weeks answering 49 requests out of every 50 and dropping the 50th. No crash, no error worth reading. A connection that hung for half a minute and then came back like nothing had happened. I pulled it in the end. By then it had cost me more of my own hours than 4 replacement handsets would have. I rent out real Android phones, physical Samsung handsets on a shelf in Singapore, each with a carrier SIM in it, driven over the network from wherever the customer happens to be. A bit over 100 of them right now. Everybody writes about wrecking the first one. Almost nobody writes about the last day of one, which is a shame, because retirement is where the money in this business actually goes. So this is how I decide a handset is finished. The 4 things I watch: there are 4 signals and I weight them very differently. A battery that has swollen or worn down. Storage that fails writes without saying so. Reboots with nothing behind them. And a vendor support window that closed. The first is instant. The middle 2 are the ones that ruin a quarter. The last is just a date on a calendar. The battery is 2 separate problems. A cell that has physically swollen is not a judgment call. The screen sits slightly proud of the frame along one edge, or the phone rocks when you set it flat on the bench. That device comes off the shelf the same hour I notice. I am not being fussy about performance there. A swollen cell in a rack with 100 neighbors is a fire. The harder version is the battery that has simply worn down. These handsets are on the charger permanently, so people assume health stops mattering once it is plugged in forever. It does not. Android reads the state of the cell, and when it degrades far enough, the power management starts shaving peak current, and the device gets slower under load in a way that no log anywhere states out loud. That one does not have to come off today. It goes on the list because it will not recover, and every week you leave it there, it gets harder to explain to whoever is renting it. Storage that fails quietly. Flash wears out. Everyone knows that part. What people expect is a chip that gives up, goes read-only, and announces itself. I have never seen that happen once on a phone. What actually happens is that one write in a few thousand comes back wrong, or comes back slow, and the damage lands wherever the device happened to be writing at that moment. So the symptom is never storage. The symptom is an app that force closes when you hit save once a day in a different app each time. I test for it with the dullest thing imaginable. Write a file, read it back, compare it a few hundred times in a row. A healthy handset gets it right every time. A dying one misses twice in 300, which no customer will ever report as a storage problem. When a handset starts failing that loop, it is done. There is no repair at this price point. Reboots with nothing behind them. A phone that reboots for a reason is fine. I am not precious about restarts. An app that ate all the memory leaves a trace. A thermal shutdown leaves a trace. A kernel panic writes something you can read afterwards. The one that ends a device is uptime resetting to 4 minutes with an empty log behind it and nothing anywhere pointing at a cause. That is usually a power rail or a solder joint that has cracked from 2 years of heat cycling, and neither is fixable on a $200 handset. My threshold is 2 unexplained reboots inside a month. Once is a fluke and I note it. Twice and the phone is scheduled out whether or not anybody has complained. That number is not scientific. I picked it after the 3rd time I talked myself into keeping a phone that had done it twice. The date that never moves. The 4th one is not a symptom at all. The vendor stops shipping security patches and the patch level on that device freezes permanently. The handset still works perfectly. It might be the fastest thing on the shelf. It just stopped being sellable for the job it was doing, because plenty of apps read that date, and the device stuck 2 years behind reads very differently from a current one. Nothing about it degrades further. It sits there being exactly as good as it was yesterday, and worth less every month. It is the one most operators ignore, right up until a customer gets a strange refusal from an app and asks why. Why the intermittent ones cost the most. Here is the part that took me 2 years to actually believe. A phone that dies cleanly costs me about an hour. It stops answering, the monitoring flags it, I pull it, I rack a spare, I move the customer across with a short note, done before lunch, and nobody thinks about it again. A phone that fails 1 request in 50 costs me weeks. The customer opens a ticket, I log in and it works. I run every check I have and they all pass. I write back saying it looks fine on my side, which is exactly what every bad supplier they have ever used also said. 3 days later, the same ticket. Now I am reading their script looking for their bug. Now I am suspicious of the carrier. Now I am wondering whether it is my own network doing it. That phone I opened with generated 9 tickets across 6 weeks, and the fix was $200 of hardware I could have swapped on day 1. The debugging hours are the smaller cost. The real one is that for 6 weeks, that customer was learning I am a supplier who says it looks fine on my side. And the whole time I was chasing it, I was not looking at anything else in the building. The rule that beats my mood, so the position I have landed on, and it is the one people argue with me about. A phone that mostly works is worse than a phone that is dead. Dead is cheap. Dead is an hour. Mostly working is a slow leak out of the only 2 things I actually sell, which are uptime and my own credibility. Which means the discipline is retiring the thing before the customer finds out, not after they report it. Not once I have confirmed it, before. So the rule is written down, 2 of the 4 signals, or 1 signal plus a single customer report, and the handset comes out. I do not diagnose further, and I do not get a second opinion from myself. I wrote it down because diagnosing is genuinely more fun than paperwork. An intermittent fault is a good puzzle, and at 11 at night I will happily spend 3 hours on a good puzzle instead of walking to the shelf and swapping a phone that costs less than the evening did. The rule exists to beat that instinct. What happens to the handset afterwards? The wipe is the start of the process and not the end of it. A normal reset between customers is aimed at the next person who gets that device. An end-of-life wipe is aimed at nobody, and it needs a different order of operations. Accounts get signed out first on the device before the reset runs. An account still bound to a handset turns the wipe into a lock, and then you own a paperweight that asks for credentials you may not have kept. The SIM comes out before that and goes back into the pool. Then the question people get wrong, which is what to do with the physical object. The tempting answer is sell it. $200 back off a shelf full of dead weight and there is always a buyer. I mostly do not. A handset that held somebody's accounts and sessions carries a history that neither I nor the buyer can audit after the fact, and casual is the wrong register for that transactions. The other reason is simpler. If it is coming off the shelf for intermittent storage faults, selling it is selling the exact fault that made it useless to me. Somebody else gets to spend 6 weeks discovering it, so the flash stays with me. On these phones it is soldered to the main board, so there is no drive to pull and shred, which means the board does not leave the building. What does leave is the case, the screen, and the battery if it is still healthy, and those become spares for the ones still in service. The number I actually plan on. Purchase price is a bad number and I stopped using it. The number is replacement cost per remaining supported month. A $200 handset with 22 months of vendor patches left is carrying about $9 a month. The same $200 spent on a model with 6 months left is carrying $33 a month. Same shelf, same listing, same everything the customer ever sees, nearly 4 times the cost. Which is why I will not buy the cheap old lot, even when the per unit price is excellent, and this is where people tell me I am leaving money on the table. I do not think I am. A bargain handset with a nearly closed window is the most expensive object on the bench, and you find that out about 14 months later. It is also why I buy one model in small batches. One model means one window and one date I can plan around. Buy too many at once and the whole batch ages out in the same fortnight, which is its own bad month, so the batches are staggered on purpose. Unit 41. Now the one I got wrong. Unit 41 had been on the shelf about 2 years, rented by a customer who had been with me since close to the start, running quiet, unattended work that never gave me any trouble. It rebooted once in March. Nothing in the logs. It rebooted again in April. Nothing in the logs. My own rule says 2 unexplained reboots inside a month. These were 2 in 2 months, so it technically passed, and I knew perfectly well that I was being generous with my own rule in order to get the answer I wanted. The answer I wanted was to not move that customer. They had a long-running session on it. Moving them meant logins they would have to redo, and rebuilding their setup was an afternoon of somebody's work. So I left it and told myself I would swap it at the end of the quarter. It went down on a Friday night in the middle of their run. I had a replacement rack by Saturday morning, which felt fast until they told me the rebuild took them most of the following week. They stayed, and that is not the point. The point is that the swap I avoided would have cost an afternoon on a quiet Tuesday. And the swap I eventually got cost a week, and it was not my week to spend. Timing convenience is not an input anymore. If the signals say out, it goes out on a Tuesday, and the customer gets told why. The swollen battery is the part I still cannot automate. It is a person walking the rack looking at edges once a fortnight with their eyes. Everything else on the list I measure from a script. Every idea I have had for measuring that one has been worse than the person. If you want phones on real Singapore hardware, retired on my schedule rather than yours, everything is at cloud.one. Subscribe for more on running phone infrastructure on